This could be an extremely sad day because this is my last jar of homemade salsa. Thankfully, though, I don't need to be sad because I'm growing lots more wonderful tomatillos this summer, and tomatillos are the ingredient that makes the best salsa. Native to Mexico, tomatillos are easy to sow, easy to grow, and very, very delicious. So these are young tomatilla seedlings. I showed them in my recent May garden tour, and they have grown so much. In fact, they've grown so much, they're ready to be planted out. Now, if you didn't see that video, you might wonder why the seedlings are grouped the way they are in little bunches, actually little circles, 4 of them around this pot. That's because of the very particular way I sowed them. I did not sow them from dry seeds in a packet. I got a very large green tomatillo from the store, an organic one, and I cut 4 slices of it, and I placed those slices just under the soil and watered. And this is the result. Now, I've done this before, so I knew that it would work, and I just have all these healthy seedlings. And they have grown up right here in the full sun. Well, it gets morning shade until right about now, which is 9 a.m. So they're used to the heat. I mean, yesterday it was 107 degrees Fahrenheit. I am going to take some of these today and transplant them out into the garden. Some of them I'm going to leave in this pot. I'm going to put a couple in other pots. But I want some tomatillos everywhere because they are such a fantastic plant. Now, throughout this video, I'm going to share interesting facts about tomatillos and lots of helpful tips to be sure you can grow these tomatillos successfully, because I want you to have plenty of them so you can have fun and enjoy making your own homemade salsa. And at the end of this video, I'm going to answer the 2 most common questions people have about tomatillos. First, how do you know when they're ripe? And second, are they poisonous? So I'm just going to dig these up with a wide berth around the plant so I don't disturb their roots. And once I get them out, then I will gently separate them and decide if I'm not keeping some of them. Maybe there's some smaller, weaker ones. I certainly don't need 50 tomatillo plants, even though I want a lot. Now, I first grew tomatillos several years ago, and I planted a few seeds from a packet, and they grew wonderfully. See, there you go. I've got this chunk, and you can see, I think, the roots. Now I'm going to separate them, but they grew beautifully, and then the next year they came back from seeds. They just sowed themselves, volunteered all over the place. That's one of the things tomatillos do. Now I've separated them in half, lots of roots on there. So I'm going to do that with all of these. You don't have to be too precious about it. You've got plenty here. You're going to plant a lot of them, so if any die, you have more left. And they are a hardy plant, so don't worry too much. Just be gentle. Now, what are some of the reasons that you might want to grow tomatillos? Why not just grow cherry tomatoes? Well, they're very, very different. Although they grow in a similar way, you plant them deeply like you would plant tomatoes because they will grow more roots along their stem, and they look a lot like tomatoes. They're actually a cousin of the ground cherry, and so their fruits grow within paper husks like the ground cherries do. But tomatillos have a very different flavor than tomatoes, and that flavor is what gives salsa, especially salsa verde, its unique and tangy and delicious flavor. Tomatillos also require far less maintenance than tomatoes, less watering and less pruning. In fact, I rarely ever prune my tomatillos at all. In addition, tomatillos hardly ever suffer from pest damage. So I have separated the first clump. These are maybes. Here's some strong ones with thick stems. Then I went to another clump and I just weeded out, very gently pulled out the smaller, shorter ones, and I left one thicker stalk growing there. I'm going to do the same thing here. So I'm just gently pulling this out. You can see there's 3 there actually, or maybe even 4, and you can pull the little ones away and just leaving the center stalk. You could plant that if you would like to. But again, you have plenty, so you can afford to be choosy. Just gently pull away the smaller ones, leaving the one you've got your eye on, the biggest, sturdiest one, behind. Then firm up the soil around that one. Move the others out of the way. And there is the second tomatillo left in this planter. Now I'm going to tackle the third one. Now another way you can do this rather than pulling, if you're at all nervous about that, is by snipping with your scissors right at the base of these smaller ones and leaving the roots intact in the ground. This is probably the wiser way to do it, to tell you the truth. But either way will work just fine. Only difference is if you snip them, you can't grow them later. You take that option away, but that's okay. I had at least 50, probably more than that here. I've left the 3 strongest ones intact, and they're usually pretty easy to separate by hand with the roots, like that. All right, let's get these planted. Here's the first one going in. Now, anytime you transplant things, they are going to look a little droopy at first, especially if you do it like me in the morning in the sunshine. I could have waited till evening, but this works too. These are very hardy plants, I believe I said. They are disease resistant, pest resistant, they're drought tolerant. They're just incredible. Tomatillos are actually very healthy for you, in addition to tasting great. They provide vitamin C, vitamin K, and vitamin A. They're full of fiber and antioxidants. Plus they provide magnesium, niacin, potassium. I think, though, that to me their biggest health benefit is that they've been found by scientific studies to be anti-inflammatory, and I can take all of that I can get. Now these 2 roots are intertwined. I'm going to plant them together and see how they do. At any point I could cut one of them off at the base, but sometimes plants do really well planted together like this. Now, speaking of growing plants close together, a great companion plant for tomatillos are peppers, especially hot peppers like habaneros or cayennes, because their spicy aromas tend to repel the pests. Now, plants you don't want to grow near your tomatillos would be brassicas, fennel, dill. They're all said to actually cause stunted growth to your tomatillo plants. So keep them away. Lots of white mycelium here. This is great. Oh, there's some worms. Great spot for these. Going to get these all watered in thoroughly now, making sure I don't get any water on the leaves. I will also mention that if you sow a bunch and you then separate them as I showed you how, and then you go to transplant them, don't do them all at once like I did. That was just for demonstration purposes. When you do it, separate a couple and plant them, then separate a few more and plant them. And that way the first ones don't dry out and get all droopy while you are, doing all the rest of them. But these are definitely looking really good. Here in the bed with the society garlic and the cherry tomatoes. See how the one in the corner has a little extra shade from the tomato plant next to it? And it's perked up completely. It's standing upright. This one next to it in more full sun, it's gonna take it an hour or more. But pretty sure it'll be fine. They usually are. Okay, I'm gonna plant one over here by the rhubarb where it's gonna get half sun and half shade. Tomatillos grow best in full sun. They love the heat, but they can also be grown in part shade. You know, that looks very much like a crime scene to me. Oh, I can't look at it. So one thing about tomatillos is they don't appreciate super soggy feet. So if you are planting them in containers, as I am with a few of mine, then you need to make sure that your containers have very good drainage. And if they do, then no, you cannot overwater them. However, if you don't have good drainage in containers, you can overwater them. So yeah, check your holes. Make sure they're not clogged. Make sure you have enough of them. Something interesting about tomatillos, and very important, is that they need 2 plants to guarantee production. Now the 3rd year I grew tomatillos, so the 2nd year they volunteered, only 1 volunteer actually came up. And at that time, I did not know you needed 2. Now, that plant did produce fruit. Some people will tell you that if you only have 1 plant, you definitely won't get fruit. That's not true, but you might not. And I noticed that I got far less fruit, about 1/3 as much as I had done the previous year when I had 4 plants. So, I always recommend that you plant at least 2 or 3, maybe more, to ensure you get full production, because they are definitely worth it. Now, after you have transplanted and watered them in thoroughly, being careful not to get their leaves wet, you need to give them a little bit of time, a few hours to perk up. But I'm noticing that mine are perking up already, and that's really good. 15 minutes after watering the dozen tomatillo plants I put in the ground or in containers, all but 1 of them are standing upright and looking great. These in the big raised bed all look good here. The one in the partial shade, of course, and this is the one that's still a little droopy, but I can tell it's going to be fine in another hour. And the 3 I left in the original container look excellent too. Well, 4 hours later, 1 o'clock and 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and these tomatillos are all looking great. The middle one is taking its time popping up, but it is coming back. These are all strong and upright. These as well in the full sun. All right, it's the next morning, and these tomatillo transplants look stupendous, as do these tomatillos. And the ones I put in my raised bed look fabulous as well. Even the one over here. In fact, last night when I came out, that one that had been drooping in the day was standing up nicely. But I didn't have my camera with me at the time, so I couldn't film it. But now I think that it's probably the strongest, tallest one of them all. Well, I see a lot of tomatillos and a lot of salsa in my future, which, well, that makes me very happy because it is delicious. Now I'm going to answer the 2 most common questions people are always asking about tomatillos. First off, how do you know when they're ripe? When do you harvest them? Now there's a myth, yes, it's a myth going around, that when tomatillos fall off the plant and they, drop on the ground, then you know they're ripe. That's not actually true. I know, everyone says it, right? Well, it is true for the most part when it comes to ground cherries, and maybe that's where this myth came from in relation to tomatillos, I'm not sure. But tomatillos could be ripe if they're on the ground, but they might not be. And they could very well be ripe while they're still on the plant, but they might not be. So how do you know? Well, tomatillos are surrounded by a paper husk. When those fruits first start growing, they're very small, and they slowly fill up the husk. When they have filled it completely, they start actually to split it. So that husk that started off kind of light green, soft, pliable cover, well, it begins to dry out, turn more and more papery, kind of crinkly, and turn tan and even eventually brown. But those tomatillos are ripe, whether they're on the bush or on the ground, if they have filled out the husk completely. Even better if they've just started to split that husk a little bit. So there you go. It's as easy as that. And now the second most common question. Are tomatillos poisonous? Well, the short answer is no and yes. The long answer is that tomatillos, the fruit, is never poisonous. But the leaves, the stems, the husk, all of that is poisonous. Which, by the way, is the same thing with tomatoes. The leaves and the stems are poisonous on tomatoes as well. So what is the cause of this poisonous reaction? It's solanine, an alkaloid within the leaves, stem, and husk of the tomatillo. So as long as you don't make tea from the leaves or decide to chop up the stem and stir fry it, you're good. Only eat the fruit and you're fine. I mentioned at the start of this video that when I first began growing tomatillos 5 years ago, I grew purple ones. But the tomatillos that I transplanted earlier today, I started from a big, fat, organic green tomatillo, which is great. They taste wonderful, but the purple tomatillos are a little sweeter, and I want to grow some of those too. So this evening, well, I'm going to sow these beautiful purple tomatillo seeds. Now, even though they're getting a later start than usual, they will do fine. They'll grow so fast in this summer heat, and by August or September, I will have plenty of tomatillos to make all the salsa I want. Now, if you'd like to check out how I make this salsa with my tomatillos, cherry tomatoes, and walking green onions, then you should watch the video above on the left, because it's going to show you how easy it is to make this delicious salsa, and even how to water bath can it so you can preserve it and eat it all year long and give it as gifts. If you'd prefer, though, you can watch the video on the right. Check out my home orchard, see how beautiful it is, what I'm harvesting these days, and let me share with you what I truly believe is the biggest benefit to growing fruit trees that no one ever talks about. Thanks for joining me today, and until next time, happy growing.